I've learned so much from being there. But now here in Houston, I'm able to kind of um,
Starting this fresh chapter is a massive deal, and I am incredibly excited about it. Russell Westbrook just signed with the Houston Rockets, and Kevin Durant is already reacting. What Durant said and exactly how he said it just shoved one of the most complicated relationships in NBA history right back to the center of the basketball world. These two superstars spent years building an absolute powerhouse together, then spent years tearing it apart publicly before slowly rebuilding their connection to find some peace. Now, they are about to share the court again for the first time in nearly 10 years. You will want to hear every single detail of how we got here. But before we check Durant's reaction, you must understand what this signing actually means. Because if you have followed these two over the years, you know this is much more than a simple roster move. It represents the very latest chapter in an ongoing drama that has never really stopped moving and has never lost its legendary ability to pull people back in. Their history was built on 8 seasons of absolute greatness in one of the league's most beloved small market arenas, followed by one summer that shattered everything they built in the most public, painful way. Years of public drama that the entire league watched unfold with a mix of fascination and deep awkwardness, and eventually, a long, winding road back to actual mutual respect. That is exactly why Durant's reaction carries so much weight. To truly understand where they stand today, you have to look back at every step of this journey. And that ride is worth revisiting from the absolute start. To feel the full gravity of this moment, we have to go back to the starting point. The Oklahoma City Thunder did not enter the league as a ready-made dynasty. They arrived as a franchise in transition, relocating from Seattle in 2008 with youth and uncertainty, along with a small market label that most analysts figured would permanently cap their potential. People were deeply skeptical that a market of that size could actually land and keep superstar talent, or if a franchise carrying controversial relocation baggage could build anything worth believing in. But nobody saw the dynamic duo that was about to be unleashed, or how fast they would put the entire league on notice. Kevin Durant had already established himself as one of the most natural scorers the game had ever seen. He was long, fluid, with an unblockable release point and a bag of footwork that let him pull up for clean shots from anywhere. Then Russell Westbrook arrived in that 2008 draft, and the entire equation changed completely. Where Durant was surgical and methodical, Westbrook was just ferocious and incredibly explosive. He was a guard who played with a ferocious energy that seemed completely unsustainable. It was as if he decided that every single possession had to be played like it was the final seconds of Game 7. On paper, these two players should not have worked together at all. In reality, they created an unguardable, must-watch powerhouse, transforming the Oklahoma City franchise way faster than anyone in the league ever expected. Within just a few seasons, the Thunder became a legitimate title contender. They tore through the tough Western Conference standings ahead of schedule, while Durant collected multiple scoring titles and even grabbed an MVP trophy. Westbrook transformed from an aggressive young slasher into one of the most versatile, high-producing point guards the game had seen in generations. Together, they dragged that small market franchise to an elite level of national relevance that absolutely nobody in the basketball world thought was actually possible to reach. Oklahoma City embraced them with a raw passion that rivaled any massive media market. The connection between these two young stars in that community grew into one of the most genuine bonds in sports. On top of that, they had a young James Harden coming off the bench as a lethal third option. That Thunder roster was not just talented. They were built to expose the structural flaws of almost every defense in the NBA, and because of their age, the entire basketball world assumed their best years were still down the road. The 8 seasons Durant and Westbrook shared together in Oklahoma City remain one of the most dominant runs by any superstar duo in modern hoops history. They won division titles and made deep playoff runs that turned the team into a primetime attraction, giving the city a national spotlight that small markets almost never get. In 2012, they captured the Western Conference crown to set up a final showdown against the Miami Heat, the LeBron James and Dwyane Wade super team that had already won a title the year before. Oklahoma City pushed them to 5 grueling games. It gave anyone watching a real, undeniable sense that this rising Thunder dynasty was no longer just a distant projection. This was a terrifying reality, already taking shape. Most analysts watching that young Thunder squad believed they were witnessing the opening chapters of a group destined to define the decade. Kevin Durant was not even 24 years old during that finals run. Westbrook was the exact same age, The assumption was universal, and it seemed entirely reasonable. The belief was these two superstars would spend their absolute primes together in Oklahoma City, building on their early success and adding the right pieces as they matured, and championships would naturally follow. That is just what happens when generational talent pairs with genuine partnership, given the time to grow into something truly complete. Their ceiling looked absolutely limitless. OKC believed it deeply. The league believed it quietly. For 8 years, every single sign pointed in the same direction. What made their on-court partnership so impossible to stop during their prime was the unique, devastating way their playing styles clashed and complemented each other. Durant could score from literally anywhere, at any time, in any situation. He could isolate from the mid-range and make it look effortless. He could pull up from deep with a hand right in his face and drain it anyway. He could drive the baseline and finish hard through contact. During those Oklahoma City years, Durant was as close to an unguardable offensive force as basketball had seen since the greatest scorers of prior generations. And Russell Westbrook created a completely different nightmare. A second parallel problem that required entirely different defensive resources and schemes to even slow down. He was never a traditional facilitator who needed structured half-court sets to find his rhythm. Westbrook was an absolute force of nature, turning defense into instant offense before opponents could even get set. He pushed the pace relentlessly. He relentlessly attacked closeouts. He turned missed shots into fast break dunks through sheer force of will and elite athleticism. When Oklahoma City was fully healthy and both superstars were locked in, their combined force was virtually impossible to stop for an entire four-quarter game. Sure, you could slow one of them down for brief stretches, but containing both of them consistently across 48 brutal minutes, incredibly rare. Opposing teams tried and failed on a regular basis for 8 consecutive seasons. Then came the fateful summer of 2016, and everything collapsed in a way that almost nobody saw coming. The Thunder had just pushed the Golden State Warriors, a historic squad that finished the regular season with 73 wins, straight to the absolute brink of elimination in the Western Conference Finals. OKC built a dominant 3-1 series lead. They were just 1 win away from advancing to the finals. The Warriors ripped off 3 straight wins to close it out. It was a devastating, historic collapse. Normally, that is the kind of shared heartbreak that pulls a franchise and its superstar anchors even closer together, a loss that bonds teammates for life. The kind of defeat that builds the shared mythology true championship teams are eventually forged upon. Instead, it triggered a chain reaction that nobody in that locker room could have predicted. Nobody outside of it could even believe it was real until they saw it happen. Kevin Durant announced he was leaving Oklahoma City to sign directly with the Golden State Warriors. The announcement dropped on the Players Tribune, a heavily polished, first-person letter that was carefully constructed and thoughtfully written. But no amount of careful writing could cushion the absolute blow of what this said to Oklahoma City, to Westbrook himself, and to every single fan who spent 8 years believing this core would eventually figure it out and hoist a trophy. The resulting fallout was unlike any free agent decision the sports world had witnessed in recent memory. It was not because players do not have a right to choose their own path. They do. But the specific circumstances surrounding his choice felt completely unprecedented. He was not leaving a struggling franchise for a destination with better resources. He was not chasing a bigger media market or looking for flashier commercial opportunities. He was joining the 73-win team that had just beaten him after he held a 3-1 lead. He was signing with a roster that already boasted 4 All-Stars and had just set the NBA record for regular season wins. He was walking away from an entire franchise that had built its whole identity around him. They drafted him, developed him, paid him, and practically put his name on the building. He was leaving the exact same city that embraced him as a 19-year-old kid, never once wavering in their absolute adoration and support. The basketball world completely erupted. The debate over what this did to his legacy, to league competitive balance, and to the nature of modern superstar decision-making dominated sports culture for months across every single platform. But none of that deafening external noise, as loud and relentless as it was, mattered nearly as much as what was unfolding privately between Durant and the man who had spent 8 years grinding right next to him in that locker room. What made this wound cut the absolute deepest, especially for Westbrook, was not the decision itself. It was the delivery that cut deepest. Westbrook later made it clear he found out about Durant leaving the exact same way the rest of us did. Zero real heads up beforehand. No long talk to give Westbrook time to process what was coming. After 8 years together, fighting through playoff wars and late-night road trips, it all ended with barely more than a text. Durant himself eventually admitted that publicly. He admitted their bond would never be the same again. And that wasn't just corporate PR talk. It was a raw admission that the way it went down had permanently broken something between them. Westbrook never tried to pretend otherwise. The fallout was incredibly raw, and it dragged on for years. Every single game between Durant's Warriors and Westbrook's Thunder became absolute must-watch television. TV cameras hunted for any interaction, scanning every sideline glance for a sign of the anger simmering under the surface. Westbrook played those matchups with a terrifying edge that went way beyond standard NBA competitiveness. Every single possession felt deeply, unmistakably personal. He was screaming to the world that he hadn't forgotten and he wasn't going to play along. Oklahoma City fans weaponized the famous cupcake meme, branding Durant as a coward who took the softest road to a ring instead of earning one the hard way. The message was highly personal and completely deliberate. A cupcake is soft and sweet. It's easy, requiring zero real fight to enjoy. The shot at Durant was obvious. He had taken the easy route, jumping onto a championship machine instead of finishing the build in OKC. That cupcake label dogged him everywhere. Signs, banners, crowd chants. It flooded basketball social media, cementing itself forever as the defining meme of that era's greatest rivalry. Durant eventually won his rings in Oakland, quietening some critics. But the soft narrative never truly died for those who believed in what OKC had been building. Rings didn't settle it. They just muddied the waters. Off the court, things between them stayed ice cold. Press conference questions about one another were met with calculated, tense answers meant to say everything by saying nothing. Passive-aggressive jabs flew from both sides, landing like heavy punches for anyone paying close attention. On-court blow-ups got so intense that the league office had to step in. Fans and media picked apart every single word they yelled at each other during those heated matchups. Sideline reporters practically hovered over their benches, desperately hunting for any scrap of audio. TV broadcasts went frame by frame on replays, analyzing every cold stare. Two guys who used to be inseparable brothers, celebrating wins side by side, hurting together, and growing over 8 long years, were now trapped in a public blood feud they couldn't escape and didn't want to. Deep down, something remained raw and completely unresolved. A private pain only they understood, and neither was ready to let go. The drama was hypnotic, not just because of the pure bitterness. Underneath the bitter, carefully worded jabs, they had 8 years of a bond that cash simply cannot buy. Two kids who grew up in Oklahoma City. They had been in the trenches together through painful playoff heartbreaks, exhausting late-season road trips, and the endless daily grind of the league. They pushed each other to greatness every single day for nearly a decade, simply by sharing the same gym. A shared history like that doesn't just evaporate because of a free agency decision, no matter how much it hurts. Instead, it gets buried under heavier, darker feelings. Bitter pride and bruised egos make it messy, and neither can talk about it openly, but it never truly goes away. Eventually, that history is going to bubble back to the surface. It always does. Westbrook made sure the entire league knew exactly what was left behind. He came back the very next season and put up the most dominant individual run of his life. He won MVP in 2017. He averaged a triple-double, becoming only the second player in NBA history to pull off that feat over a full season. And he did it after losing his franchise partner. He did it while carrying the raw emotional weight of an entire city, a community that felt utterly abandoned by someone they once considered family. He did it in an arena where his name alone had to carry the franchise, justifying everything Oklahoma City desperately wanted to believe about itself. That season was no fluke. This wasn't about padded stats, soft schedules, or favorable matchups. You cannot explain away what he did with cheap, convenient excuses. It was a broken-hearted superstar taking all that pain and channeling it into a historic, venomous warpath, and he absolutely dominated. Years passed, and the sharp edges of their feud slowly softened. Durant captured 2 rings with Golden State, validation for his controversial jump. He moved to Brooklyn, then Phoenix, before landing in Houston for the 2025-26 season in a blockbuster summer trade. Meanwhile, Westbrook put up historic numbers in Washington before bouncing to the Lakers, the Clippers, and eventually the Denver Nuggets, where he embraced a smaller role, rebuilt his value, and fueled a deep postseason run. Over time, the way they talked about each other in interviews changed. The public bitterness faded, signaling that the old wounds were finally scabbed over. Nobody was rewriting history or making excuses, but two grown men had finally grown up. Separately, without any big public show, they both arrived at a place of real, quiet peace. Then, things aligned in a way that felt almost too poetic to be a coincidence. Houston lost Fred VanVleet to a preseason ACL tear. A critical roster spot lay wide open, and Russell Westbrook, who had opted out of Denver to find a better situation, was still sitting on the market weeks into free agency. Inside sources reported that the Rockets were suddenly a very real option. He was willing to sign for the veteran minimum. No demand for a massive deal or a starring role. He just wanted a team that valued his identity on the floor. And Houston had something way better to offer than a massive paycheck. They offered a shot at his very first championship ring, playing a key role right next to Kevin Durant on a dangerous Rockets squad that boasted elite advanced metrics the previous year. Getting his relentless motor, veteran presence, and elite transition game on a cheap, low-risk contract made absolute sense for everyone involved. It was a perfect fit, and the full-circle nature of this reunion was impossible to ignore. A former superstar returning to Houston under totally different terms, chasing the single trophy missing from his legendary resume. Nobody missed the weight of that moment. Durant's immediate reaction proved how far their relationship had actually come. Appearing live on Up and Adam, he did not dance around the question or hide behind the usual boring media-trained responses that athletes use to say absolutely nothing. He was blunt. He called Westbrook a certified legend. He said Russ deserves to leave the league on his own terms and added that having him in Houston would be incredibly dope. Contrast that with the bitter history, the cupcake memes, the freezing cold press conferences, and the years of mutual silence. Remember all that on-court trash talk? You instantly get why those words hit so hard. That is not a guy still holding a grudge from 2016. That is someone who finally processed the trauma of that split, quietly accepted the messy reality of what went down, and arrived at a place of true respect for their shared history and who they became. Anyone who closely watched their bitter feud back then could feel the shift. Hearing the actual warmth in Durant's voice was a powerful story in itself, showing how far they have both come much better than any sports media talking head ever could. But make no mistake, Houston is not getting that unstoppable, peak MVP version of Westbrook from Oklahoma City. Back then, Russ was easily one of the most terrifying athletic forces the league had ever seen. He treated every single matchup like a personal vendetta, constantly breaking opponents down with a level of sheer violence that a basic stat sheet could never fully show. Today's Russ is a different beast, and honestly, he is exactly what this young Rockets core needs at this point in their development. He is a battle-tested veteran who finally embraces his role, something young Russ never had to worry about, because back then, he was the system. He can play limited minutes without cutting back on his legendary intensity. For a first-ballot Hall of Famer, that kind of humility is incredibly rare. He simply leads by example, showing up with his trademark, relentless energy every single day, grinding in practice and pushing teammates behind closed doors. That is how you build real culture, not just talk about it. He flies in transition, pushing the tempo before defenses can even set up. He still attacks the rim, draws heavy contact, and gets to the free throw line. That keeps opposing defenses honest, even when the ball isn't in his hands as the main option. On top of that, he crashes the offensive glass at a rate normal guards can't match, creating vital second-chance opportunities for a young roster hungry for possessions. Plus, he brings a level of raw, competitive fire to the Houston locker room. Young guys like Amen Thompson and the rest of that rising core will absorb those habits just by sharing a floor with a guy who has survived at the highest level for nearly 2 decades. That kind of veteran presence cannot be taught in film sessions or run through practice drills. You just have to be around it and let it naturally shift the standard you set for yourself. Houston is getting that on a minimum deal. For a franchise with real championship goals built around an ascending young core, that is a massive addition. It is the exact kind of veteran impact that reshapes a locker room culture without ever showing up in a box score. Those endless what-if debates about Durant and Westbrook were never fully resolved. Maybe they never should be. Some questions are actually more valuable when they stay unanswered, because that uncertainty is where the most honest basketball debates happen. How many rings would they have grabbed in Oklahoma City if 2016 had played out differently? Nobody can answer that. The league shifts, injuries, disrupt plans, and rosters evolve around superstars in ways that no one can predict years down the line. What we do know, and what can never be stripped away, is that regardless of how 2016 ended, they gave Oklahoma City and the basketball world 8 straight years of pure magic. Built on complementary dominance and a fierce, competitive drive. A rare partnership between two young athletes who crossed paths at the perfect moment for both of their careers. Those legendary Oklahoma City years still shadow both of them wherever they go, not as some heavy burden or an unresolved grudge, but as the bedrock for everything they achieved afterward. It is the lens through which every single move they make will always be measured. Some stories never truly finish. They just find new backdrops, fresh chapters, and new reasons to keep hoops fans glued to their seats, waiting to see what happens next. The saga of Durant and Westbrook is exactly like that. It all began in Oklahoma City with 2 teenagers facing endless possibilities, backed by an entire city that was completely ready to believe in whatever they built. 8 seasons of pure greatness, followed by one dramatic summer that shattered their partnership in the most public way imaginable, leading to years of a bitter feud that captivated the NBA, before a long, silent road back to each other that neither superstar put on display for the cameras. It happened like healing usually does. Now they find themselves in Houston, both older, wiser, and far more secure in their own skin, sharing a quiet bond that finally looks like true peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from forgetting the past. And definitely not the kind that pretends the pain never happened. It is the deep peace of 2 men who lived through the fire together, survived on opposite sides of the divide, and eventually found their way back to solid ground. The ultimate question remains, can Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook actually secure a championship together in Houston? Is this the full circle moment that finally changes how we remember their history? Could this be the final redemption arc that Westbrook has spent years chasing? Or is it just one more stop on his journeyman career? Fans are divided on where this leaves their legacy, but one thing is certain, this final chapter is impossible to look away from. Because this legendary partnership, after surviving everything thrown its way, is still far from finished.